This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. This is the podcast's 1-year anniversary episode. On March 14th of 2019, we dropped the first episode of the Graceful Atheist Podcast. And here we are a year later, 34 episodes in, 13,000 or so downloads. And mostly I just want to thank all of my guests who have been amazing in sharing their stories of deconversion, of secular grace, and having honesty contests with me. My guests have all been incredible, and I just would ask you, the listener, to reach out to my guests who have a public presence and tell them how much their stories have meant to you. I also want to thank you, the listener, for being part of this process. Thank you so much for writing me letters, for talking about the podcast on blogs and social media, for doing rating and reviews in the Apple Podcast Store. Thank you for being a part of this podcast. I want to just invite you to celebrate with me for this 1-year anniversary and let me know that you're out there listening. Contact me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com or on Twitter @gracefulatheist. Let me know that you're listening. I want to hear from you. I want to know that you're out there. And in particular, if you would like to share your story of deconversion or deconstruction, please reach out to me. It would be weird for me not to mention that I am releasing this episode in the midst of a pandemic. COVID-19 is affecting us all. Please hang on to the end of the show in the final thoughts section, where I have a few comments about the unique preparedness of the secular community to handle the social distancing that we're experiencing right now and how we might reach out to our friends online. On to today's show. My guest today is Sam. Sam has a blog and an upcoming podcast called When Belief Dies. His deconversion story is a tremendous one with heartbreaking elements, and he tells it with brutal honesty, and I really am thankful that Sam is my guest for the anniversary episode. Sam was heavily involved in his church and was in progress to become an elder when the doubts started to creep in. He now uses his experience of deconversion to blog and to podcast to talk about the hard questions that Christians often avoid. You can find his work at whenbeliefdies.com. There will be links in the show notes. And now I give you my conversation with Sam. Sam, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very glad you're here. Can you just give us a brief introduction to who you are and why you wanted to come and tell your story?
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Sam. It's good to see you again, mate. And I basically been on a deconversion journey for the last 3 years or so. So kind of summer 2017, I had a bit of a revelation and realized that I just believe things because I believe them, not because I should. And since then, I've been kind of on this really bizarre journey backwards and forwards. I thought it'd be really good to come on and chat to you, but this time in a bit more of a formal setting, I guess, recording my podcast, and then share my journey, talk about the blog that I write, which is called When Belief Dies, and just have an opportunity to share my story amongst the others that you've spoken to. And I'm a big fan of the podcast, so it's kind of a little bit surreal to actually be on it. It's nice though.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, and I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and to tell your story. So I always say that deconversion stories are kind of our origin stories, and they include our faith tradition and then the loss of that faith. So let's start with what was your faith tradition? Like, what did you grow up with, and what was your religious experience like?
Yeah, so I born and raised in a Christian family. So you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from England. I'm kind of been lived in the north of England since I was about 8 years old. So I've got a bit of a weird accent. You can't quite pin it down. But, so I was born and raised Christian. My dad is very much a Bible reading on an evening to me and my two brothers. I've actually got really fond memories of that. And I don't know whether that's a good thing to have fond memories of or not now. And I kind of look back at it. But, for many, many years, the thought of sitting hearing my dad tell Bible stories. He's a fantastic narrator, so he did that for a job for a little bit, and he's got an incredible way of taking, like, the story of Samson or I don't know, David, Goliath, or whatever the story is, and telling it in a really dramatized and exciting way. So yeah, and their parents, my mum and dad's parents, are also Christian, and I believe the parents, my great grandparents, are also Christian. So literally like a generational kind of Christian upbringing.
Right.
It was very kind of Anglican or C of E based, so Church of England. So a little bit more formal, not to like the high Anglican, which would be kind of like lots of liturgy and lots of kind of like reflection and kind of sitting quietly in pews and stuff. A little bit more kind of charismatic.
Okay.
But yeah, so basically born and raised in it, and then over time, kind of worked my way into more kind of evangelical churches. So kind of stepped away from this TV section with my parents as they moved around a little bit and decided that certain churches weren't teaching the right things, and then went a little bit more charismatic, and then kind of stepped away for a few years, really, when I was a teenager, still very much believing that God was real, but not caring about God. Just wanting to live my own way, smoking, drinking, drugs, sex, like just the normal teenage stuff. Which feels weird saying that, because I think if my parents heard me saying this, they'd be a little bit like, "Oh, you did what?"
Yeah.
Which is always funny.
Sorry, Mom and Dad.
Yeah. So that's now online forever, I guess. That's just fine. So yeah, so basically kind of fell away for a little bit, and then a really good friend of mine actually passed away, sadly, in an accident, and that really shook me to my core when I realised that life is fleeting, and it's here one moment and it's gone the next. And my now wife, then girlfriend, basically wasn't a Christian, so I was in a really weird situation where I was like, okay, so I'm now going out with a non-Christian, and I want to be a Christian again, because I realised that life is like I could go at any moment. I want to make sure that I A, know where I am, B, have lived my life according to God's will, and that eventually when I get to heaven, or whatever that sort of language is, he will look at me and say, "Well done, my good, faithful servant." I wanted that over my life. I really believe that was true. Like I still believe that God was real. I just hadn't cared. So basically, I gave my wife an ultimatum, which is a bit of a weird situation. I basically said to her, "Hey, look, I believe in God, and I love you, and I need to live my life in accordance to His will. And I really believe that means that I can't be with you unless you're a Christian." And looking back on it, I feel like an absolute jerk. It's such a terrible ultimatum to give. I mean, we were both 19 at the time, so I'm 31 now, and my wife is 30. And I mean, she loved me, and she went out with me, and she had loads of friendship fallouts because people didn't like me, and it's just a really bizarre situation. So she ends up becoming a Christian. I guess it's going to go one of two ways, right? Either she's going to not be my girlfriend anymore, or she's going to become a Christian.
Right.
So yeah, which is I guess is a conversation we can come back to later in the podcast, maybe. Or I'm writing a blog post about this, so I'm sure a conversation will occur around that weird situation. But I'll pause it there for now and carry on. So yeah, eventually I ended up going to Bible college. So I went to an Assemblies of God Bible college. Assemblies of God is a very charismatic. My dad would refer to them as swinging from the chandelier sort of tradition. I'm aware that you're quite familiar with AOG and spoken about them before.
That is correct. Yeah, that was the Bible college that I went to, was also an Assemblies of God. So yeah, very familiar.
Yeah, okay. So I was at the UK one there, a place called Massey Hall. So from 2010 to 2013, I studied there and got a degree in theology and biblical studies and all that sort of stuff. I basically left there really believing that God's call over my life was to teach His people His word. That is what I'm on this earth to do. Is I'm here to teach God's people His word, to equip them to go out into the world, to tell other people about His promises, His love, His kindness, and that's what I was all about. So I left Bible college and got married, and then realised, okay, crap, I need to support my wife now. I should probably get a full-time job. And the church doesn't really pay, so ended up stepping into IT, and then just kind of fast forwarding the next few years, giving it all in one big go. So apologies.
Sure, no worries.
Yeah, so I got a job in IT, and then very quickly realised that I was not living God's call in my life, and sad to say, I got depression extremely badly, and so I actually ended up losing my job, losing loads of my friendships. We ran out of money. We had to leave the flat we moved into, and I almost lost custody of my wife in this situation. And that was really hard, basically, really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just pushed into kind of God in that situation. I was like, hey, look, you know what's going on, God. You've got me. You understand the situations I'm going through. I need to trust you with this. Yeah, just kept going to church. Eventually got myself back together over a couple of years. Kind of like 2015 started getting back into work. So that's like early 2014 that I left my job due to depression. And late 2015 I got another job in IT, and then since then I've been in IT. But the kind of Christian story continues where once I got back into church, I got back into a place where I was able to be confidence mentors and coping and able to be fluent in my dialogue and preaching again and teaching, that sort of stuff. I realized that I was called to church leadership still, and I wanted to get involved. So I chatted to the elders, and they've known that I had struggled with my faith a little bit, because this was just after I'd kind of started questioning stuff. And I thought the best way to deal with that, to deal with these questions and issues and stuff, is to throw myself into church.
Yes. Yes.
It's never the right decision. Anyway, so I threw myself into church. I went to the elders and I said, hey, look, I believe God was calling me in my life. Do you agree? They're like, yeah, we do. We believe you and Kirsty should go to this church in the north of England. You should serve there, see if God's calling you there, etc., etc. So I went and I listened to them, and me and Kirsty moved over there in kind of, when was it? It would be October 2018. We moved over to this church, and I got involved with leadership straight away. So on the leadership team, preaching regularly, sharing my journey with people, my stories. On the leadership teams, making leadership decisions, getting ready to become an elder. So it's a New Frontiers church system. So it's I don't know whether you guys have heard of New Frontiers of there. So try and explain it. It's kind of in between Anglican, which is Church of England, and AOG. So it still fully believes in the gifts of the Spirit, that God moves today, but it isn't really, really intense with kind of pushing people over and falling on the floor and all that sort of stuff. That does happen, but it's rare, and people are a little bit uncomfortable with it. So it's not like we're really happy with that. It suited me really well. Anyway, yeah, got heavily involved with that, and we can come back to the why I started questioning. But basically, extremely heavily involved with that until December last year. So December 2019, I stepped down from leadership, realizing that I could no longer lie to a congregation, which was an extremely hard decision, but one that I made with support of my wife, and the main elder there understands the decision, although it's cost him a lot of pain and hurt. So and here I am today.
Wow, there's so much to respond to in that. The first thing that just really struck me is your feelings now about the ultimatum that you gave your wife. The things that we do that we think are the right thing to do in the moment in the confines of a religious faith. Man, when you're outside of the bubble, that starts to look really ugly. I feel that, I don't know, the regret or the almost shame for some of the things that you might say to people, the things that I've said to people, the things that I, as a church leader, things I've said to congregations that now I see as manipulative. And that's hard to overcome as well. Was the time where you were feeling some depression, was that related to doubt, or was doubt a consequence of that depression?
Yeah, it's a really good question. That was, linked to, very heavily linked to me leaving Bible college and really thinking that I was called to teach God's people His word, and then realizing that my life didn't somehow naturally just slip into that. Seeing other friends from Bible college who were offered, pastor places, able to go to different churches around the world and serve and do amazing things, and me thinking, what have I done wrong, or am I missing? And essentially just realizing that I didn't want to be stuck in an industry job. I spent years training. I wanted to go and serve, and it wasn't like I deserved this. It was much more like I really believed I was called to this.
Yeah.
And that hit me super hard. So like and I guess when you question those things, you've got two options. You either kind of follow those questions through and get to a logical conclusion, or you basically stuff your nose into Christian teachings, books, podcasts. You just basically do everything you can to saturate yourself in the known and the comfort of the faith tradition that you hold. And I did that. Like I literally read every single C.S. Lewis book there is.
Yes.
And all his letters. I read absolutely everything, just to kind of try and remind myself about who God is and how it's okay that things haven't quite turned out the way they were. So the depression definitely kicked off, and I realized that the calling I believed God had placed over my life wasn't coming into fruition in the way I wanted, which you could easily construe that as me just thinking that it wasn't happening in my way or my time. But I just started to think there's something wrong here, and panicked, I think, quite a lot.
The other thing that really strikes me is your description of when you identified that you were having some doubts, that the response that you had was to jump back in, to participate more, to work harder. And I feel like this is a really common theme in deconversion stories. So someone has a deep and profound faith like you had, and they are trying their best to live that out. And as things don't play out the way the script is supposed to, the way that Christianity is presented to us, then our typical response, rather than recognizing maybe there are some flaws in that story, is to blame ourselves. I'm doing this wrong somehow. I'm not praying hard enough. I'm not reading my Bible enough. I'm not witnessing to people. I'm not preaching enough, etc. And so I just want you to talk a little bit about that impetus of doubling down and re-engaging as you're trying to start to struggle with some doubts.
Yeah, I jumped back in hard. I mean, Kirsty, my wife, has known that I've had doubts ever since I started having doubts. Like, there's not been a time when I haven't told her. We have a very open and honest relationship. I think she was extraordinarily shocked. And throughout this period of me having doubts but jumping back in, we kind of refer to it as the yo-yo period.
Yes.
So, one day I'd be like, I don't believe any of this is true. It's complete shit. And the next day I would be, God is real, and I'm going to, basically push myself to a point where I believe he is real again.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of referred to it as almost like there were days when it's almost like you're standing on this field, right? And you can see these poles in the ground, which is what you need to grab hold of and believe in. But some days there's fog and you can't find those poles. You don't know where you're meant to be holding them. And other days somehow it's really clear. You can just grab them, or at least you can clear the fog away enough by like moving and getting hold of these poles again. And it just felt like these anchors, these poles, were becoming looser and looser and looser and looser and looser. And I couldn't find them some days, I could find them other days. And I'm a very open person. I'm happy to chat to anyone about anything. And yeah, I pushed myself into church. So I got involved with this church plant. So we're still living in this town that we moved to support the church plant. My wife is still a believer. She's still going, so I'm still going to support her. And the congregation is slowly finding out about me stepping out of leadership. Still situation we'll come to in a bit.
Okay.
I approached the leaders of my church that they sent me from to this church plant, and they basically just said to me, you need to get involved more. You need to push yourself. You need to experience God, see him moving. You need to remind yourself of the truths. And I was doing stuff like I got into, apologetics books, apologetics podcasts. Like I know you mentioned on here before, Unbelievable by Justin Briley. Like I listened to that now religiously in a weird way. I listen to that every single week.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And, listening to loads and loads of stuff like that, trying to get myself back into a place where I believed every day. I'd read, John C. Lennox, I'd read C.S. Lewis, I'd read all these famous kind of apologetic Christians who can really help you have a logical understanding of God.
Right.
But then, the night comes again and the mist comes in and there's this horrific doubt and I can't see the light anymore. It's gone. Okay, I need to keep going. Oh, there's the day again I can see. And then it goes again. And I just kind of felt like this pattern consistently happened to the point where I didn't have any days left. It was just night. It was just fog and confusion and mist. And I was just searching for anchors and they'd gone. And I was just left in this kind of like field, just like, I don't know where to go. What do I do now? So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really beautiful analogy as well. That no more days. It was just that dark night of the soul permanently. That's incredible. Before we turn the page to focusing on the doubts for a moment, I think I often try to elicit this out of my guests to try to answer the question to any believers who might be listening to this that might doubt your former faith.
Yeah.
This is one of these things that I find really odd. I find myself many times with the believers in my life, with believers who listen to the podcast, defending that I actually really believed in the past. And when I hear your story, my heart breaks, right? I hear how hard you were trying, how much you loved God, how dedicated you were, how committed you were. And the fact that it wasn't working again, I think we have a tendency to blame ourselves for quite some time
Yeah.
until we can't do that anymore. And we start to focus on the truth claim of Christianity itself. So let's turn there. And let's start by prefacing and saying that I think any thinking person who has a faith, the flip side of that coin is doubt. I had Jennifer Michael Hecht on the podcast, and she described Christianity, the unique feature of Christianity, in that doubt is a feature and not a bug. As soon as everything comes down to belief rather than just practice or mostly practice, when it's mostly belief, the flip side of that is doubt. So acknowledging that doubt is just a feature of Christianity, what were some of the early doubts for you, and how did those doubts progress for you?
Yeah, it's good. God's goodness was something that I had been spoken to about and had prophesied over me, and it's throughout Scripture. That was really where it started to sink in. So I guess kind of talking about how I really started to. Obviously, I left my job with depression because of God's calling in my life. But the moment I started to realise that I genuinely wasn't sure if I believed anymore was I was in the Lake District. I remember it so clearly. I was in the Lake District with my wife and we had just one child then, and got two little boys now, but just one was around.
Okay.
And we were just having nice days, just walking. The Lake District, for those who don't know, is this part of England called Cumbria, and it's just a really beautiful kind of like mountain-esque region with lots of lakes, valleys, and hills. Just beautiful walks. It's really wet. It's incredibly beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I was walking through this place, just kind of going like, God, I want to believe that you're real, and it's so beautiful being here, and it's so real. But I was struggling with a slip disc, so I was really struggling to walk. Watch my little boy wanting to run ahead with me, and unable to, and wanting to carry him, but not be able to pick him up properly, and then realizing that my wife, who was pregnant then, was going to give birth shortly, and I wouldn't be able to pick up this newborn and put him down a cot because of my back. I just began to go, I don't understand. This doesn't feel good. My God is a loving God, and He wants to pick me up and put me down as I want my little boy. And He wants to run with me. He wants to experience life with me. That's what I've been told. That's who God is, right?
Right.
I started reading a book during that time called Sapiens. I'm going to get the author's name wrong.
Is it Harari, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fantastic book. It has its flaws. I'm not saying it's perfect at all, but what that book did is that book helped put humanity, as in the Homo sapien, our species, into perspective. For me, humans are created in the image of God, right? As a Christian, they're created in the image of God. They are special. They have purpose. They have destiny. They have meaning. They have intrinsic value and worth. And this book helped me realize that that's a lie. And that really shook me. So I've studied evolution at school. I understood it. I got it. But you kind of look around here, it doesn't really affect today. So I'm just going to carry on and live in this Christian narrative that we've been feeding ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I realized how much of a short time man had been on this earth, and how much of a horrific impact we had to this world. Essentially, if we are created in the image of God, we are created in the image of an asshole. Like yes. It is. We've absolutely done so much. We've done terrible things, and we've done awful things, and I cannot possibly understand how a good and loving God would create something that is able to. I'm not saying we've just done good. Just done evil. We have done good. I'm fully aware of that, but I just don't understand this dynamic that God could have created and allowed essentially death, meaningless, purposelessness, horror, and atrocity to bring about a species like ourselves to kind of basically screw this place up. And yet it's okay because we're created in God's image and therefore we're special. It just seems like the most arrogant thing you could possibly say.
Yeah.
So anyway, this book really, really shook me and made me realize how tiny humanity is. So God's goodness and then kind of evolution slammed together began the doubts properly.
Yeah, let me respond to just a couple of those things. I think one of the things that you're describing here is sometimes called the problem of evil. And we don't need to travel down the whole apologetics road, but I think it's worth commenting here that I think most Christians grapple with that. They do grapple with it, but then they pick their favorite solution to that and then move on and never think about it again. I actually had a theology professor who, ironically, the way that he described it was to say that a good God would create good people, and that those good people would then go on to choose to disobey that good God is absurd. And that was his answer, or his theodicy. That was his answer to the problem of evil, that it was just absurdity. And what it lacks for in description or helpfulness, it makes up for in honesty, right? There really is no explanation for this. And it sounds like that was a topic that was really important for you, that you couldn't reconcile.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, it's definitely shaken me to my core. You get told that essentially God created us out of nothing or dust, however you want to translate it, and we had we had a choice to live in this perfect way. But the story of evolution isn't that. There was no choice. We're not given the option to be pain free. To if you it depends. People will come back to you and say, well, you can't read Genesis like that. It doesn't say you're definitely pain free and there was no suffering or anything. But I kind of view it as we're going to go back to this place of Eden when Jesus returns. If you believe in that stuff, which I obviously don't, but well, I did. So therefore, I believe in a place where you have to be pain free, or be able to be at one with God, to have a communion with Him, to fully have a relationship with Him, which will be the fulfillment of everything that we are. But yeah, evolution doesn't agree with that, and that's obviously is the best that we have at the moment. It's the theory of evolution, but it's also a fact. It's not just because it's a theory doesn't mean it's a fact. It's both of those things.
Right.
So it just doesn't agree with it. So how can we say that that's true? We can't. So where do we get this idea of a fall from? Plucked out of the sky? I don't know. It's a whole one.
Yeah. So the other really interesting part of your story that I find fascinating is that you were pretty honest with the church that you started to work for, that you had doubts. Can you go in a little more detail about how those first conversations went? And were they just being accommodating, or did they really understand that you were struggling?
I think it's fair to say that they were just being accommodating. So I think when you come up to someone and say, I'm struggling with my faith, I don't know what I believe anymore, or I have days when it's dismissed, they usually do one of two or three things. The first one being they usually go, I'm really sorry to hear about that. I'll pray for you.
Right.
Or they'll kind of, say, hey, look, what is it you're struggling with? And they'll just kind of tackle that one thing. Or they'll just kind of reject you because I think they're scared. The church leaders I spoke to were the first kind, hey, I'm really sorry, let me pray for you. And they'd give some advice, then let me carry on.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have an experience where someone would stop and actually kind of have we would read through a book like, Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True, or Sam Harris's End of Faith, or something like that. Like, there was anyone that would be willing, as you call it, having an honesty competition. Like, there was no one who said that to me. It was just it must be so hard for you guys. How's Kirsty doing? How are the boys? What are you doing with your life? Where are you going? Are you praying still? Are you speaking in tongues for 20 minutes every morning?
Right.
Have you fasted about this? Kind of, is it just a week, a day, a month, a year? Because God can be silent sometimes, and that might be what's going on. It was those sorts of responses. Right. And that's why they said just push yourself back into church, whether it be a small group setting, we won't necessarily let you preach right now because we're already going through stuff, but hey, there's this kind of youth event that's going on, or there's a student event that's going on, and we don't really care about their lives as much as we care about congregations. I see you can go and do that, that's fine. So sorry, this is me being flippant.
Yeah.
So it's just a really interesting reactions from them, that they would push me to do stuff. Yeah, kind of not really have a response that's actually kind of constructive and helpful. And that, without being rude, has happened in every kind of church elder relationship that I have had since I kind of started saying I'm struggling. This has been 2 or 3 basically. And the guy that I kind of was involved with the church plant with he's like a brother to me. Like, I've got absolutely no problems with him at all. He's a really, really good friend. Mm-hmm. It's the same for him. Like, I can't imagine how hard it must be for him to think that this person was going to run this church with me and be an elder alongside me and bring about a change to this small working class town in the north of England. And he's no longer a believer. Like, he's in this place where he's trying to work that through as well. Of course, it's hard and difficult. Right. But it's a similar situation. Like, I spoke to him in November. We touched base briefly in January, but we haven't spoken about my doubts the other leaders in the church haven't ever come to me and talked to me since. My wife doesn't have anyone coming and saying to her, "Hey, how are you doing? Can we get around to you? Can we pray for you? What can we do to support you?" Which she would really appreciate. So, obviously that's wrong, but she can go and do that. That's absolutely fine. I want to support her with her beliefs.
Right.
And I made her move flipping town to get involved with this church. So I shouldn't just go, "Yeah, we should just stop."
Right.
She's a stay-at-home mum with 2 little boys. One is in the beginning of primary school here in the UK, and the other one is at home and being a little terror. And her entire support network is the church.
Right.
It's just really really complicated. So yeah, that's how they kind of originally started doing, kind of how that's played out. It's been very lax. I'll just tell you one more quick story before I'll let you jump back in. Recently, my wife went to see some friends, and there's a really cool kind of a museum just down the road from us. I'm trying to be ambiguous with names.
Sure, absolutely.
But some friends came from the city that we moved from originally to come see us. As Kirsty, my wife, they were like, "Oh, hey, so Sam's not going to church anymore, is he?" And Kirsty's like, "How do you know that?" And it transpired that my elder, my really good friend, has clearly gone and told this elder, who then clearly found out from her that she was seeing Kirsty and told her I was no longer going to church. But then that elder, these people hadn't come to me and said, "How are you doing? Can we get around you? What can we do to support you?"
Right.
I mean, it'd be a really hard conversation now because I'd had to be very, very clear with my beliefs and what I do and do not want from them. But there was no kind of reaching out in love and in grace, as we talk about, secular grace. There's no support or encouragement or anything. Just because I no longer believe the same things as these people doesn't mean that I am now emotionless and okay and easily to be manipulated and stuff like. There's still lots going on. So it just infuriates me that my wife's not getting very much support, and other people know probably before the people in the church that I've stepped down in know. And it's just a really weird, down the grapevine trickling effect of people are finding out in sporadic ways. It's just bizarre.
Well, you're describing, I think, one of the hardest parts of deconversion, and that is the loss of community. You have a group of people who tell you they love you and act lovingly towards you. And then one day when you say, "I don't happen to believe the same things that you do," they turn their backs and walk away. And that can be devastating. That can be absolutely devastating. Since you've talked about your wife here, I don't want to press you too much, but how did you reveal to her that you were having doubts, and what has her response been?
Yeah, it's great. You might have been able to tell that I like to talk, so she gets this all the time, much to her annoyance.
Yes.
So basically, I would just let her know anything and everything that's going on. So I'm really, as I mentioned before, very, very open and honest person. I don't mind sharing stuff with people. I don't mind talking about my depression and how it's still a battle. I don't mind talking about what my beliefs, when I had them, and my lack of beliefs now that I don't have them. And so as I kind of realised that I was in depression, that was the make or break point. I very clearly remember her saying, "I need to go away and think about this." And there was this kind of 12-hour period where I was like, "Is she going to come back?" And it was all reconciled and we were fine. But because I was very clear with her that I cannot go back to work, it means that we're going to lose this house. That's how bad this is.
Right.
And so that's the level of kind of honesty that we're at and stuff. It's forthright and to the point. And yeah, as I had the honesty when I was reading this book, and as I was going through my doubts, I go through my doubts in regards to my calling, or the calling I believed I had, she was with me every step of the way. And she has always hoped that I'd find my faith again and believed that I'd find my faith again. Mm-hmm. And it's only really been in the last kind of 6 months that she's really gone, the yo-yo's dropped and there's no more up left. It's just down. In terms of my faith, now, this kind of talk about this mist and this darkness and these depressions and stuff like that is changing. I'm coming out into a different place, and I'm not there anymore. So just to be clear about that as well, is I'm not still in this "oh my goodness, help me" phase. I'm very much in it. I understand who I am and what I believe at the moment. But yeah, so she's been aware of it every step of the way, which has been really good. Hard because of the whole yo-yo stuff, but yeah, she's been supportive and she's been amazing.
That's fantastic. Just one more parallel description of the loss of faith. One of my favorites is from a blogger named Captain Cassidy, who was on the podcast, and she described the pool of faith. As you're reading the Bible and participating in the church, water's going into the pool. And as you experience hardships or things that don't quite line up, water gets drained out. And at some point, the things that you were doing that were adding water start to not add water anymore. And at some point, you find yourself at the bottom of an empty pool. And at that point, there is no going back. There really isn't a yo-yo after that.
Yeah.
If that rings true to you or not.
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. And it kind of brings me on to another point. I think when I mentioned this lead elder guy that is like a brother to me, and when I was, I'll talk about anything, so I don't really do secrets. So as I was chatting to him about the fact that I need to step down from church, he realised that it was to that level and that I would no longer be. I called it serve or lie, so I didn't mind at the time. I've actually stopped even serving up at the time. I didn't mind doing. It's a church plant, so we meet in the school hall, to doing like the setup, setting up the sound system, putting the chairs out, getting things ready, microphones, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Taking those down. I do the serve side of it, like litter picking once every 3 weeks or whatever. I would not do the line part where I host the service when someone brought a word of knowledge. I would explain what that is, or prophecy or something, and kind of help the church to kind of go on this mood journey into God. So I said this to him, I need to stop this. He basically said two things, which I still find really, really hard. First one is like, well, I don't know how you can be saying this because you have no basis for morality or justice or hope. Like where do those things lie? I understand why he thinks that those things are rooted in Christ, but there is no evidence that those things are rooted in Christ. So the fact that it was just a blanket, you don't have these things unless you're in Christ. Or if I do have these things, it's because of Christ. I've just rejected that part of it.
Right.
I still have these things, which I found really bizarre. And the second one was, he's like, you will come back to God because something will happen. There'll be an issue or a circumstance, and you will have to come back to God. And he's like, I don't want to speak ill over you or anything. I'm not prophesying this will happen, but something's going to happen to you, and you're going to need God, and you're going to come back. Man, that really made me want to never go back. Just to prove the point.
I love it. I do want to step back just briefly and talk about the time period where you had rededicated, you were participating in the church, you were preaching and teaching. Tell me about the progression of the doubts at that point, and then what was the last straw, as it were? What was the thing that made you say, I have to start being honest with myself and people?
Yeah. During that time when I was heavily involved with church again, I was reading, as I mentioned before, loads of books like N.T. Wright, Simply Christian, and all the classic evangelical, spirit-filled books that people would recommend to you to read if you were struggling with doubts or wanting to explore Christianity afresh, I guess. And the fact that I was able to preach regularly every kind of like 4 to 6 weeks or whatever, and able to lead and serve, and I know the right words. Like I know how to make people feel a certain way. I know how to encourage people in their faith. I know if someone says this, I should say this. If someone does this, I should respond with this. How to, I think manipulate is quite a strong word, but potentially manipulate people into a certain way. And I find it really helpful now that I'm a manager as well, to be able to help people kind of understand the journey and take them on the journey and make them see where they're going, where they come from. It's all those kind of coaching skills and stuff. Like I've really pulled that into my preaching and my way of being. We're hoping to release a podcast also called When Belief Dies in the nearish future. So me and a really good friend called Dave basically just started meeting up once every 2 weeks over lunch for an hour and a half and just talk about all the things that we find really confusing, just the big topics: tithing, talking in tongues, healing, church models. What is that about? Small groups, scripture. Who is Christ? Who was Christ? Is the Gospels reliable enough to say this is who Christ was? And as we started talking, as we started realizing, it became very, very clear that I did not believe enough to call myself a Christian. So at the time, I was working in a Christian charity who kind of do work. Again, I'm trying to be ambiguous, and he's still working there. So I started realizing that I was definitely agnostic, if not agnostic atheist, and Dave, who openly says on the podcast, was asking lots of questions which could make all the pillars fall down. And essentially, as these kind of different pillars around my life that are holding up my faith and helping me to preach and teach and move forwards in God, they began coming down one by one by one by one by one. And I started realizing that I had nothing that I could hang my hat on. There's no peg that I can go, this is still there, I've got this. and realized that I had essentially shut the door and realized that it was kind of locked behind me.
Mm-hmm.
There's no key that I could go back in and open that door to get back in and actually be able to go back to that point where I'm completely going to believe it again. And I've realized as well over time that if I cannot sit within the conservative Christianity that I held, I don't want to sit within Christianity. Like, I don't want some sort of, this is just me personally, some sort of liberal Christianity where Jesus was a mystic and he kind of raised spiritually. Like, I want to believe that a physical body was raised from the tomb, that Jesus was a literal Son of God who rose because God accepted him as a sacrifice for my sins and the sins of everyone on earth. I want to literally believe that stuff. And I realized that I couldn't.
Right.
And I can't. And there is nothing that I've come across in my now 3 and a bit years of searching that has gone, oh yeah, there's this one thing that hang your hat on this. There's this, it doesn't exist. And the more I look, the more I listen, the more I kind of dive in, the deeper the rabbit hole goes. And I'm still reading books and listening to podcasts like yourself and the Thinking Atheist podcast and Pine Creek on YouTube and Cosmic Skeptic and all these people, and the way you know who they all are. But yeah, these big names within the atheist circles, as well as the Christian circles, the Justin Briley's, the Ask NT Write Anything podcast, and all the books. Currently reading The Language of God by Francis Collins. Find that a really interesting read, and I'm not trying to just swap myself and just rather than saturate myself with Christianity now, just saturate myself with atheism and disbelief. I'm trying to be really open and honest and go, what do I actually believe and why? Right. And recognizing that, these things all fell down. So basically, as I started asking more and more questions, going deeper and deeper and deeper into apologetics, I realized that it is just hope. And it is just hope. There is nothing more than it. Like, Christianity is a hope-giving mechanism. It enables you to have hope. It gives you a purpose, a destiny, a future, an afterlife for a reason. It gives you these things. It doesn't mean these things are actually true. And that was a big thing. Just because you want something to be true doesn't mean it is true. And I wanted Christianity to be true, but I couldn't say for certain that it was true. And that's when the pillars finally came down, the ceiling collapsed, and I was standing in this kind of like dusty room looking out for sunlight going, oh crap, it fell through.
Wow, I could not relate more. For me, the literal last straw was the binary nature of the resurrection. When I realized that I had no objective, and here I mean just humanly objective, not in the Platonic sense, but no objective reason to believe that a person named Jesus died and literally rose from the dead 2 or 3 days later, I knew that was it. I was done. There was nothing left. The other thing I want to comment about your story is you talked about being able to set a mood, so to speak, in the church. And I want for the believers who might be listening to recognize that this does not mean that Sam was an evil, manipulative person. This is something that I think is, this is honest. This is something I hear from many preachers and particularly worship leaders. Worship leaders in particular are very much about setting an emotional mood. And for those of them who then deconvert and are honest about it, they'll talk about how there's a method to this, right? There's a way of going about this that brings people into a sense of worship. And that fact alone, the fact that you can set that mood, says something, right? That this is a human experience, that there isn't a supernatural explanation and there's a natural explanation for what people experience. And it's very real, and it's very hard to recognize that it's a human experience.
It really is, and I think I appreciate that. You said it twice there, like saying that I really was a Christian. I really believed it and followed it and did it, and I wasn't just trying to manipulate people. I was trying to help people,
right?
Believing that God wants to use them and help them and work in them. And another big thing for me, just going back to how human this is like, when was the last time that someone was walking down the street or in a wheelchair on the street and suddenly got the ability to get up and move again, or was healed from some sort of limb that hadn't grown back, or heard an audible voice and God said to them, I'm actually really here and this is the evidence to prove it? Or, like, these things don't happen unless we're in a situation, circumstance to bring them about. And you might hear about these kind of dreams and other things that people go through and experience, but again, it's coming from a hope and a desire for a religious encounter that is a freeing, hope-giving encounter. Don't see these things. Like, people don't just start crying because God's touched and moved them when they're on the commute to work on a Monday morning. People don't start speaking out in tongues all of a sudden when they're in the middle of a Skype conversation. Like, these things only happen when there is a prevalent mood circumstance and situation. If God was a real God, a loving God, a God who existed in absolutely every fibre of reality, these things wouldn't just be locked into a Sunday or a Tuesday evening group. They would be locked into the fabric of existence.
Yeah.
See them, experience them, and know them to be true. And we don't. And the closest we get that I can see is we get philosophical arguments like the Kalam cosmological argument, whatever. There's so many arguments out there that you'll hear people talk out and reveal. And the Unbelievable podcast is fantastic for going through those one at a time.
Sure.
But that's the best we have. We have philosophical arguments, again, that are just philosophical arguments. And if you really look at philosophy, as I know other people have said in your podcast before, you get to the situation where you realize you can't actually even prove that you exist. So I don't know how you possibly think you can prove that God exists.
If you start hanging out with philosophers, you start to doubt everything.
Yeah.
I did want to also just comment about, I also really relate to your response after deconversion to then go and explore these Christian thinkers, right? To reread, N.T. Wright or C.S. Lewis, or to listen to the Unbelievable podcast. And I think this is something that's the hardest to describe to the believers in our lives, because they will block out almost anything that is counter to Christianity. And what is so freeing and amazing when you come out the other side and say, well, I'm just a human being, is that you aren't limited to what you can go explore. Shocker of shockers, it doesn't burn your ears to hear someone talk about Christianity. and when you walk into a church, you don't light on fire. And, not that you would expect that to happen, but that you're just free to explore every avenue that you find interesting. And that might include things that you now disagree with, or the representatives of your former faith that you no longer hold.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important part. So I think I really first heard it from Matt Dillahunty, but I'm sure it's happened many times before, is that it's the difference between I'm convinced there is no God to I'm not convinced there is a God. There is a difference there. I was trying to explain this to my wife the other day, and I think it's quite a weird concept. I think you say to someone that you're an atheist, they naturally jump into hard atheism where you are convinced there is no God. I'm not sure that anyone can ever get to that point either. Like when people say, I believe 100% that God exists, like how can you possibly believe something 100%?
Right.
That's completely, you're not logically thinking at all. It's just bizarre. So it's a difference. I'm not convinced that God exists. It doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. It just means that I have no evidence or proof to say it does exist. In actual fact, if it turns out that a God exists, probably not, I'm afraid to say, shock horror, the Judeo-Christian God that I believed in and worshipped, I really hope that I can turn around and go, well, I couldn't prove that you're there at all. I did my best. I searched and I looked and I asked the questions, and I wasn't going to just sit on my hind and pretend that you didn't exist. I wanted to know as much as I possibly could to the nth degree that you did or did not exist. And it's about pushing yourself. It's about asking questions and seeing what sticks to you. And, I've had the opposite sorts of doubts where I've gone, I don't really have any meaning or purpose, do I, if I don't believe in God? And actually be able to then let those things settle in your mind, work them through slowly, recognizing that you have time. Like you're not trying to either hold on to the flag of Christianity, hold on to the flag of atheism. You're trying to discover what you as a person believes as you step out of the hand of Christianity that's been pushing you down and realize that you actually have room and space and freedom to ask questions, to learn, to grow, to realize that it's okay to be friends with people who have different sexualities than yourself, to realize that it's okay to not give money to a church, to realize that it's okay to not believe in divine healing and intervention, and to realize that you have preferences and thoughts and opinions and ideas that haven't been instilled in you from the belief system is a really important thing. Learn who you are. I would shout that to anybody who's saying that they're struggling with doubt and stuff. Is don't hide behind a facade. Become you. It's so important.
Man, I think we should just wrap the show right there. This is very well said. Because you've kind of brought the subject up, for yourself now, how do you answer the question, where does your morality come from, and how do you derive purpose and meaning? Because I know that's what the believers are asking themselves.
Yeah, I think purpose and meaning for me, and I'll come back to morality afterwards, purpose and meaning for me, if you create something for yourself, or you put yourself into a frame of mind, which I think we do every single day, It doesn't make it any less real or true. It just means it's not infinite. It doesn't last forever. It is something that you have created. It doesn't mean that it can't affect every aspect of your life if you live in the fullness of that thing. That's why I do a lot of kind of mindfulness meditation. So it's completely non-spiritual at all. So I use an app here in the UK called Headspace, which I think you've got over in the US as well. And I'm sure it's everywhere. I should know this working in IT. Anyway, so I use Headspace. I try and do it daily, and it just gives me the ability to bring myself into the present, to stop thinking about, the next thing I'm going to do after this conversation, or, thinking about the conversation before I get there, but to actually be present in the moment right now, because there's stuff that's happening right now that I need to be involved with. And sure, those things are past and present are really important things to think about, but actually being present is vital to you enjoying your life. And yeah, having the ability to create a purpose around being present or being around my children. Like I now have a secular job because I believe that it was wrong for me to be in a Christian organisation when I was no longer a Christian. Why do I have a job? I have a job because I need to support my boys and my wife. I need to pay for the bills. I need to give them clothes. I need to make sure that they've got enough to survive and enjoy life. Like, it's about thriving, not just surviving. And these are all things I've given myself. They're not God-ordained things. They're Sam-ordained things. I've said, this is important. I need to make sure I'm doing this. That's purpose and meaning. Just because it isn't infinitely given by a divine creator doesn't mean it isn't life-changing and complete. You look at any circumstance, any civilization, created their own destinies, their own dreams, their own hopes, their own forward progression. And they stuck to that, and they made differences and changed them for better and for worse. And that's the really, really important thing to recognize. That is, you can give yourself shit meaning and purpose. You look at Adolf Hitler or any kind of like dictator or mass murderer or anything like that. You can see they've chosen the wrong things.
Right.
But because you can stop and go, they've chosen the wrong things, brings us on to the morality element. We think that the only way that we can know right or wrong is if there is a divine being to tell us what is right or wrong. I find that really hard to sit with now when I look at the Old Testament and even some of the New Testament and look at the morally abhorrent things that took place within those books. I can't remember his name now. The book's called Skeletons in God's Closet. And it's a really interesting book written by a Christian, which looks at kind of the big three. Like I say, so it looks at hell, judgment, and Old Testament atrocities, and mainly genocide. And they're massive subjects. Like, hey, how can an all-loving God allow, women and children to be murdered within a civilization? And he kind of, he breaks it all down and explains it all. And I just couldn't, reconcile that with an all-loving God. Either the Bible's wrong and God didn't ordain those things, which therefore means I cannot trust it, or God is immoral and it's wrong and I shouldn't follow him. They're the kind of two places that I came to with that. So I really think that morality is something that has evolved with us. I think it's still evolving. We're looking at kind of women's rights. My next one we're going to have here where my new place of work is going to be Women's Rights Day. And it's going to be an amazing day where we celebrate women in the workplace and in society for who they are. We have LGBTQ events and we celebrate people for who they are because people matter. I kind of struggle with labels, but people matter. And that didn't used to be the case, right? It really didn't used to be the case at all. It was if you were homosexual, you were shunned, potentially murdered. You look at the guy that solved the Enigma machine. He ended up killing himself.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't able to be accepted in the time and place he was. Like, we have moved on.
Alan Turing was a genius.
Yep. I understand why Christianity could potentially be appealing. So a big thing for me is the fact that when Christianity started, it did give the least and the lowest in society hope, purpose, meaning. That is why Christianity was so powerful and spread the way it spread. It gave children, women, slaves, people without Roman citizenship, the ability to have, we are important, we have meaning, we have purpose, we have value. It granted the least within society, who were also the most within society because of the most numbers, the ability to have status. Not necessarily recognized by the people around at the time, but that doesn't mean that hope cannot be powerful enough to give that society eventually. When 300 AD, I forget the exact date, when Constantine made Christianity legal within the Roman Empire, that's when it all changed. But until then, it was illegal and it was weird to be a Christian. But it still gave people meaning, hope, and purpose.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's true though. That's the big thing. So yeah, I can understand people find it attractive, but it doesn't mean it's true. It was just a powerful thing, which made a difference. Obviously, it made a difference to the entire world, but it doesn't mean that difference is truth.
I want to save some time to talk about your current work now. And so you have a blog called When Belief Dies and an upcoming podcast that I got to be on at one point. First, I just want to talk about the name. The name is evocative. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I'm quite a dramatic person. You might be able to tell that from my stories or my little analogies and stuff. And I think belief was everything for me. Like, belief was my life. My life was about belief. I believed in an almighty God who knew me and loved me and knew the hairs on my head, even though they're limited. He was a powerful person. I believed he was real from the top of my head to the bottoms of my feet. Like, he was there. Obviously, that changed, drastically changed, and it started off, and I realised that I was mourning a God. It took, I think it was Matthew Taylor who on the podcast said, I'm going to get this wrong now, so forgive me. But, the journey was a long journey, but it was the realization that was sudden.
Yes.
Is that vaguely right? Forgive me, Matthew. I know you're going to this way.
That gets the idea. Yes.
Yeah, and so basically, it was a point when I realized that I was mourning God. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm mourning God. Like, what is going on here? And I realized that my belief in God had died, and I was almost like a newborn child in this like new world, like confused and disorientated and befuddled with all these kind of weird concepts and ideas and things that I didn't understand. And talk about secular grace and humanism and all these really strange concepts that I've never bothered to look at because they were meaningless within the frame of mind that Christianity gave me. So I realized that my belief had died, basically. And a little bit of kind of info on the logo for the blog. It's actually kind of meant to be Buttermere, which is one of the lakes in the Lake District, which is my favourite lake. And that's the walk I was on with my wife and my boy at the time, when I really realised that I needed to start blogging about my deconversion. So yeah, that's meant to be the logo. It's meant to be a representation of the Lake District to kind of show that, mark that place where I really began to go, oh gosh, this isn't real.
And then you've also done something really interesting in that you started writing for some number of months before you started publishing, which I think is really fascinating. So talk about how you're releasing these and the delay and why you decided to do it that way.
Yeah, so most of the blog posts are 6 to 9 months behind where I am now. Some of them are a couple of years. I did start writing in 2017. I basically said to my wife, hey, look, I am going through something. I don't know where this is going to go. I'm fairly sure I don't believe anymore, but hey, who knows? I'm going to read, I'm going to look, I'm going to ask questions, I'm going to move forward, let's see where this goes. I was like, I think I should publish it. She's like, great idea, but you tend to really commit to something, and then, within half a year it peters out. Why don't you spend a year or two and just write blog posts as and when they come to you? So I got about 20 down, and then I decided to stop for a little bit and really reflect. And then I thought, no, I do need to do this. So I started doing one a week, and I'm still I write one a week, and now I'm publishing one a week. Yeah, it really is going right back to the really, really raw first moments where the first blog post on the blog, you can go on there and find it, is talking all about how I felt like I was on a bit of wood in an ocean, and I could hear the waves crashing against the shore, but I couldn't get back to the shore. I had left the shore and there was no getting back. And I thought I was going to drown. I was screaming out for help, but there is no one listening to me. Like, it's that, everyone who's been through deconversion knows those feelings of loss, horror, terror, just the most horrific feelings possible. And the blog just tracks my journey. It tracks the books I've been reading. It tracks the podcasts I listen to. It tracks the people that I get in touch with. And it just tells the story, my story. It's just my story. It's nothing, I'm not trying to put any views out there that aren't mine. I'm not trying to say anything that's not mine. And some of the posts are going to be ranty and sweary, and some of them will be thoughtful and interesting, and some of them will be metaphor, and some of them will be literal. And it makes it really clear what's what. But so yeah, they publish every Saturday at 9 a.m. UK time. Just need to head over to whenbeliefdies.com, and everything's there. There's a Facebook page, a Twitter page, an Instagram page, a Goodreads page, a YouTube page, all that sort of stuff. Like, I don't know how much I'm going to use it all, but it's there for when and if I do. Yeah, that's my thing at the moment, is sharing my story, because hey, as you say all the time, stories matter. They're important. Like, people are relational. Like, we were literally evolved within community, and we care about people. Fundamentally, it is part of our nature to have relationships and to hear stories. And even this is why Christianity is so powerful. It's a story that grabs attention and meaning and has depth and insights into parts of the world and places. Like, this is within the book Sapiens. He talks about why stories are so important within that book, and that really helped me realize why Christianity was so powerful, why other religions are so powerful. They create a narrative and a story that you can get behind. Yeah, I just thought it's time to share mine.
I just want to respond to the story part for just a second. I wrote a blog post that talked about this, where I recognized that one of the compelling parts of the story of Jesus is, in our Western culture, to lay your life down for your friends or your brother or your loved ones. It's the ultimate sacrifice. And if you look at just secular examples of that, every war movie that has ever been made where somebody sacrifices their life, every dog movie where at the end, they've rescued somebody, it loses their life. And I referenced specifically, there's a Will Smith movie called 7 Pounds, where he literally gives away his organs as he is dying. The idea of sacrifice is so integral to us as human beings, but also in our culture, that it makes the Christian story, it makes Jesus dying on a cross for us deeply compelling on some intuitive level. And that's what makes it so dramatic for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Stories are the clay around which our cultures have made themselves. You look at politics, or you look at businesses, or you look at whatever it is. What is it we're actually seeing? We are seeing a story. We're seeing something, an idea. It's not something tangible. You can't pick politics up. You can't pick a business up and play with it like it's an idea. Sure, people can put money behind those ideas, like Google, but you can't actually touch and hold Google. You're just part of that story, and that's why it's so powerful. They create the ability to change lives, to change thoughts, to change the way that societies progress and move forwards. Yeah, I completely agree.
And then for the podcast, is this an extension? You mentioned your friend Dave. Can you just tell us about what you're doing with the podcast and when to expect it out?
Yeah, so Dave is a Christian with questions, which is fantastic. And basically, we just wanted to get a space where we were able to have people on, and we were able to also just talk between the two of us and say, this is why I don't believe this, and this is why you believe this, and this is why I'm not sure about that, and what do you think about this, and why is that there? And it's just to ask all the questions in a really honest, open way. We've shared the first episode with a couple of people so far, and the response really interestingly has been, I don't know who else to tell this to, but I'm also in the same place where I have all these questions. But if I tell anybody, I'm just going to get rejected. And for me, that's like, okay, man, this stuff needs to go out there. Like, we need to be able to share these stories and these questions and these things, because it needs to be okay to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We cannot just keep hiding behind facades. We need to be talking about real life situations and our opinions of those situations. Because let me just tell you, listener, your opinion matters. It really does matter. So yeah, we also wanted to share that podcast. So we'll be when it's going to go live yet. Eventually it'll go live. The information will be on the website when it does. We're currently in the first kind of edits of the first few episodes. We're trying to get to about 20, and we'll release one a week for a little bit and start recording the next bunch. So it's a similar sort of format where we're going to get some behind us before we go live. We want it to be a well-oiled machine.
Right.
There's definitely an audio changes throughout as we try to mess around with background levels and stuff. So it starts off pretty poor, but hoping that gets better. But yeah, so it's just going to be the same name, When Belief Dies. Lots of people have said it's a fantastic name because it really does represent what happens to your belief when you go through this stuff. So I'm happy with that, at least.
Fantastic. Yeah, and if there are any pastors or lay leaders that are listening, I guarantee that you have people who are struggling with doubt, honest people who believe, who are struggling with doubt. By not giving them an outlet to express those doubts, that only makes it worse. It does not make it better. So hopefully, Sam, your work, you and Dave, being just honest and being able to talk about things, I have a feeling that's going to help a lot of people. I'm excited to listen to it myself.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate that.
So just, you've mentioned it before, but just real quick, how can people get in touch with you? And if they want to explore your work more, just let's reiterate one more time.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, basically, if you go to whenbeliefdies.com, you'll find links to all major social media there. The YouTube section is not used so much. Everything else is used. There's a contact form. Basically, just have a read. You can subscribe to the blog. You can just check it out, whatever works for you guys. It really is just a way for me to get across my story. And my hope is to make a difference into people's lives and to have someone go, oh, man, that is honest and that is real and that is relatable. It's the big thing, eh? Check it out. Let me know what you think. I really love feedback. As you mentioned, before we went live that, when you start off a blog, it takes time to build up and grow. And I'm seeing it grow already, which is fantastic. So the first post went live January 2020, and it's just one post every week. So, there's still time to catch up and read the stories and get involved. And the hope is that it expands into a bit more of a community. We're going to look at kind of starting maybe a subreddit or a group, linking with maybe another group or something, and creating a little bit of a community where there's a few outlets for expressing these things. As I get to know people, I can get people onto my podcast, and that goes live as well. And hopefully we can just share these stories a little bit more with each other. That's the hope.
Fantastic. Sam, I'm incredibly impressed with your story and the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been amazing. Appreciate it.
Final thoughts on the episode. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sam as much as I did. I think he tells his story in a compelling and brutally honest manner. I want to reiterate again for those of you who are listening who were believers that you don't hold Sam's honesty against him in the telling of his deconversion story. His story resonates with me so much. It is my story in many ways. The deconversion stories are unique, and yet they rhyme. Sam's story rhymes with mine very much. I loved his analogy of the fog and the mist and the missing anchors, of trying to go through the process of doubt and find anchor points, just to come to find that there were none. At one point, he says that he realized there was nothing, that he had come across nothing in all of his research post-deconversion that he could hang his hat on. No foundation with which to believe the things he formerly believed. I relate to that quite a bit. I was heartbroken when he described being a Christian and telling his soon-to-be wife, or his future wife, that he couldn't be with her because she wasn't a Christian. And the guilt that we feel for the things that we have said and done as believers post-deconversion. We have to have a little secular grace for ourselves through that as well. Sam's story epitomizes the self-discovery process that takes place post-deconversion of really finding out, in his words, finding out who you are and becoming that person. I want to thank Sam for being on the podcast and for sharing with such brutal honesty. He has an inspiring story that I think many of you will be helped by. Thank you, Sam. You can find all of Sam's work, including an upcoming podcast that I was on, at whenbeliefdies.com. A few comments on COVID-19 and the social distancing that we all find ourselves in. It is very natural to feel a lot of anxiety and loneliness in a time such as this. I just wanted to bring up the fact that the secular community is almost uniquely prepared for such an event. We are used to being distributed and pushed out all over the world, and we are used to connecting with one another online. This is the secular grace thought of the week. I'm encouraging you to step up and take on a leadership role. Invite friends onto a Hangout, Google Hangouts, Zoom, Skype, whatever. Participate in online communities, Facebook groups, what have you. Make an effort to be a part of community during this time where people are feeling incredibly isolated. And don't hesitate to reach out and ask for human contact when you need it. In this case, maybe virtual contact. I had the opportunity to recently be a guest on the Seekers and Skeptics podcast, where we were talking about being ex-Christians, former Christians. David Johnson is the host of the Seekers and Skeptics podcast. The podcast is great, and please go check it out. I'll have a link in the show notes. But what's also interesting was our post-podcast discussion between all of us who are former Christians who have deconverted, and the camaraderie, the esprit de corps that we felt. I've just met these people. I had never talked to them before, and instantly we were all friends. It's that kind of community building that I think we are uniquely capable of doing. And so I encourage you, as the Secular Grace Thought of the Week, to build community during this isolation time. As always, my name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Please join me and be graceful human beings. Time for some footnotes. The song is a track called Waves by Makaih Beats. Please check out her music. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to help support the podcast, here are the ways you can go about that. First, help promote it. The podcast audience grows by word of mouth. If if you found it useful or just entertaining, please pass it on to your friends and family. Post about it on social media so that others can find it. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This will help raise the visibility of our show. Join me on the podcast. Tell your story. Have you gone through a faith transition? You want to tell that to the world? Let me know and let's have you on. Do you know someone who needs to tell their story? Let them know. Do you have criticisms about atheism or humanism, but you're willing to have an honesty contest with me? Come on the show. If you have a book or a blog that you want to promote, I'd like to hear from you. Also, you can contribute technical support. If you are good at graphic design, sound engineering, or marketing, please let me know and I'll let you know how you can participate. And finally, financial support. There will be a link on the show notes to allow contributions which would help defray the cost of producing the show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, or you can send email to gracefulatheist@gmail.com. You can tweet at me at gracefulatheist, or you can just check out my website at gracefulatheist.wordpress.com. Get in touch and let me know if you appreciate the podcast. Well, this has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Grab somebody you love and tell them how much they mean to you. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.